How many of us truly fear the open sea? Is it the endless depth that unnerves us, that endless void plunging into blackness? Or is it the terrifying idea that something monstrous could be lurking beneath, unseen, waiting? Throughout history, few sea creatures have stoked fear in the human imagination like sharks. While much of that fear is based on myth, not science, there are real cases, chilling, unforgettable cases, where witnesses claim they saw something far beyond the norm, something prehistoric, something impossible. Among all the tales whispered across generations, one name surfaces again and again: the Megalodon. Sailors, fishermen, even U.S. Navy servicemen, they've told stories that seem to defy belief. Could this ancient apex predator still be roaming the depths? These are their stories. As you step into the fog, only you can decide what's real and what lies beyond. In 1918, amid the turbulence of a world at war, the southern coast of Australia hosted a mystery that had nothing to do with submarines or battleships. David Stead, a highly respected marine biologist and author, traveled to the peaceful fishing town of Port Stephens, drawn there by a wave of unsettling reports. Local lobster fishermen, experienced men who'd weathered storms and sea monsters of every shape, were refusing to go back out to sea. Something had shaken them to their core. Stead spoke with them directly. These weren't wide-eyed youth or drunken sailors. These were hardened mariners who now looked over their shoulders every time they neared the water. They hesitated. They spoke in hushed tones. And when Stead asked what they'd seen, one of them finally broke the silence. It was like no shark we've ever seen. Huge, massive, broke through the water and crushed an entire lobster pot, steel frame and all, like it was paper. The shark had appeared just as they hauled in their catch. They said it was white, enormous, and disturbingly fast. After devouring the full trap, it vanished, only to return again and again over the next few days. Several traps were taken, some torn apart. Eventually, the visits stopped, but the fear lingered. When Stead pressed the men about its size, they gave astonishing estimates, somewhere between 150 to 300 feet long. Even Stead, a man of science, was disturbed by how sincere and terrified they were. He dismissed the exaggerated lengths, but not the event itself. Had these fishermen encountered a true living relic, a megalodon? Decades later, in his 1963 book Sharks and Rays of Australian Seas, David Stead shared this encounter with the world that it caused a stir. Here was not just a sea yarn, but a story backed by one of the era's most credible oceanographers. It fueled the growing idea that the oceans might still hold secrets from prehistory. Science tells us the Megalodon ruled the seas for millions of years, only to vanish 3.5 million years ago. With females potentially reaching lengths of 60 to 80 feet, they were capable of swallowing whales whole. But was it truly extinct? After all, other species like the coelacanth, thought long gone, were found alive in modern times, and soon, another story would surface, far from Australia, but bearing an eerily similar pattern. Zane Grey was no ordinary novelist. Famous for Western tales, yes, but his heart truly belonged to the open ocean. In 1928, aboard his 10-meter steamship off the Rangiroa Atoll in French Polynesia, Grey was chasing stories of giant marlins. But what he found instead would stay with him forever. As he stood on deck, something immense caught his eye. Just beneath the waves, a shadow moved. A massive form breaking the surface, barnacle-encrusted skin. A huge, square-shaped head. A dorsal fin unlike any he had ever seen. Grey had caught tiger sharks, nurse sharks, even makos, but this was different. It was easily longer than his boat. The local fishermen had whispered stories about Magu, a legendary shark god said to dwell in the deep. A beast whose jaws could swallow full canoes whole. Grey had laughed at the myths. But now, he wasn't laughing. It wasn't a whale shark, he told his son, Loren. It wasn't a whale either. It was a shark, a giant one, bigger than anything alive today. Loren, just 13 at the time, didn't believe him. Not until 2 days later, when they returned to that very spot. There it was. Again, birds flew above it. The water shimmered yellow in patches. And then, the tail breached the surface. 10 feet out of the water, Loren would later recall in a 1994 interview. The head was as wide as a room. Zane later wrote about the encounter in his book Tales of Tahitian Waters, describing a shark possibly 40 to 50 feet long, yellowish, barnacle-covered. Not a whale shark, but something more terrifying. And yet after that, silence. Until the 1990s.it was a calm, routine day in the Indian Ocean. A U.S. Navy vessel was en route to Goa, India. On board, a petty officer was on watch duty with two other sailors. They were passing time, cracking jokes, watching the pod of dolphins that had followed them for days. Suddenly, the dolphins broke formation. They scattered in every direction, frantic, and then they saw a massive shadow beneath the waves. A dorsal fin slicing the water, at least 10 feet high. This wasn't a whale. Then they saw the creature breach, its head, unmistakably a shark's head, like a tiger shark's, burst from the ocean, clamping down on one of the fleeing dolphins. Blood filled the water. I've seen bull sharks, tiger sharks, but this, the petty officer later said, this was different. Much bigger. Sonar readings later confirmed an enormous object beneath the ship, an estimated 82 feet long. That length placed it well within the estimated size of a mature megalodon. Even the most optimistic skeptics struggled to explain what it could have been to. In 2003, marine filmmaker David Riggs led a scientific expedition off Bremer Bay, Australia. The goal? Tag great white sharks to track their movements and gather oceanographic data. One of their tagged sharks was a healthy 10-foot female. Months later, the tag washed ashore. At first, researchers assumed it had simply detached, but then they checked the data. On Christmas Eve, at 4 a.m., the shark made a sudden, high-speed descent to almost 1,900 feet below the surface. But something was off. As it went deeper, the water temperature didn't drop. It rose from 46 degrees Fahrenheit to 78 degrees F. Conclusion? The tag had been swallowed whole. It stayed inside something's digestive tract for 8 days, drifting slowly, before being expelled. The team's best guess: a massive predator, perhaps a cannibalistic great white. But what kind of animal could ambush and eat a full-grown great white shark? Riggs and his team were left speechless. Science still maintains that Megalodon is extinct. The fossil record shows its disappearance millions of years ago. And even skeptics of cryptozoology argue it would be nearly impossible for such a giant creature to remain unseen in the age of sonar and satellites. But the ocean is vast. In fact, much of it remains less explored than the surface of the moon, and stories like these, from fishermen, sailors, biologists, and military personnel, continue to surface. Some are embellished. Some may be misidentifications. But others? Too detailed, too consistent, too real.